Looking at that copper price, $7,480 a ton. Often copper seen as Dr. Copper and a leading indicator of the overall health of the global economy. Is this a positive sign? Who's buying copper? And you pointed out that the US housing market is looking very, very weak.
Well, the figures that came out today are pretty weak in the US housing sales. So you have to ask yourself, who is buying copper? Chinese manufacturing slowing down. So I'm not sure if it signifies that, the global economies are on a strengthening trend. I think it more signifies the fact that China is definitely in the market and buying up precious metals and industrial metals because they're sitting with $2.5 trillion US dollars. The dollar's starting to weaken again.
Are we talking about another inventory rebuild cycle beginning in Europe?
I believe so. They're very cagey about that, and they only every 3 years tell you how much gold they've purchased. But you've got to ask yourself how, with the talk of deflation in the US, how come gold is now knocking on the door again close to $1,200? Copper, it's at $7,500 when its all-time high was at $8,800. In a week's time it could be back over $8,000. Yet there's still a lot of worries globally, although there's some signs that economies are doing well. So you have to ask yourself, who exactly is buying all this copper?
The detractors to the China story will say to you, don't forget that when we saw copper at above that $8,000 a ton level, it did a large retracement back to below $3,000 a ton. Could we at this point be looking at an overdone copper price?
I would be surprised if that was the case. When copper was trading at 8,800, you had the US housing market flying. So when everything collapsed in the US, certainly in their housing market, it was inevitable that the copper price would come all the way back to below $3,000. Now you've had the US, although you might say that the US housing market has bottomed, there's no indication yet that it's certainly starting to recover. It might have bottomed, yet the copper price has moved up considerably. So my view is really that China is exposed to a huge amount of dollar risk and are looking for better opportunities and are stockpiling these metals.
Telkom, I'm not sure if you've heard the news flow today, and the stock is basically trading with an E, and we're looking at auditors at this moment revising their opinion or not authorizing their opinion on the results. We've also seen Telkom media numbers that Duncan McLeod was disclosing earlier, saying that Telkom media was sold for 68 million rand. They spent 471 million rand on Telkom media, so a loss of around about 403 million rand. And again, it was coming back to that capital misallocation. Where do you think Telkom is going from here? It's up 2% today.
It is. Well, I heard the news on your show actually. So if you look at the markets, either shrugging off that news or they haven't fully digested the news yet. I will have to have a look and see, what the chances of success of this claim against Telkom are. We had thought
5.5 billion rand claim is certainly material.
Yeah, it's material, but and that's why possibly the auditors have put an emphasis of matter against it. But we'll have to do a little more investigating and see whether there essentially is a case for Telkom to answer, and the problem with that is that you mentioned the court date is only in February next year, so a lot more uncertainty hanging over Telkom, and yet surprisingly the share up 2%.
And an emphasis of matter is not generally seen as a positive indicator, is it?
Definitely not. So we'll have to, they just recently settled at Telcordia, and they had provided for that, I think, $80-odd million. So certainly, as a shareholder in Telkom, I'm not too happy to hear this.
Do you hold Telkom?
Yes, I do.
Would you consider selling at these levels?
No, I'll first have to see exactly what it says. I've personally liked Telkom as a stock. And although I've been very disappointed in the past at the way they've wasted shareholders' capital, I know there's no risk without reward, but I think they could have, in some of their deals, they could have cut a lot earlier. But I wouldn't be a seller at this stage.